is George Washington, but it's the general to you. Or you could call me President 1, not 3 or 2. And you probably heard a lot of silly stories about me, but let me lay it down how raw I really used to be. I got a hemp operation back at the plantation, selling the stickiest shit around the new nation. So come run and find me if you wanna get high, cause honestly I got the bombest, I cannot tell a lie. Pick it dry, of course I'm gonna try. Bag it up and break it and then just let them buy it. And if the Brits wanna come and take a piece of the cut, I'll raise a whole fucking army, let them see what's what. The king's like, yo, I gotta get paid. I'm like, tough titty, cause y'all's a whole ocean away. And you can try to send some ships to come and make me pay up, but that's an awful long way just to suck these nuts. You get my fucking message, son?
Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here with a Operation GCD special series, starting off here with a tale on the Society of Cincinnati, my heritage through the American colonization and revolution there that leads into the stories of the Society of Cincinnati. And today's guest, a fan of Operation GCD, who is going to have an intersecting story regarding his heritage in the Society of Cincinnati. So, Brad, I appreciate you joining me here. Welcome to Operation GCD.
Thank you very much for having me. You are popping my podcast cherry today, so congrats on that.
Nice. Now, I appreciate you joining me. Your story's great. You reached out to me just for some context. You reached out to me. You know, you were looking for information on the society and throughout your storyline. And I just you know, if you can kind of kick us off there with how all that went down, I you know, I think that's provides context to the conversation today.
Oh, sure. So my last name is Minyard, Minyard. I never knew, you know, where I came from. Nobody in the family knew. Some people said, well, maybe England, maybe Ireland. So I started a family tree, and I came to the proverbial brick wall. I came to an ancestor that did not know who his parents were, who his two wives were, or any of his siblings. I don't know if he was born out of wedlock or not.
Right.
And I found out, and the weird thing about it, JJ, my family tree, especially my paternal line, has not been linear. I got up to my fifth great grandfather in one direction, and then I had to start in the opposite direction. So I'm still kind of trying to figure out what's in the middle here. But are you familiar with the 1739 voyage from Argyll, Scotland to North Carolina? Basically a group of...
That's the main Scottish kind of settlement of North Carolina, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the maiden voyage, and as far as we know, at least in colonial times, it was the first mass immigration to North America. There were about 350 Highland Scots on a boat called the Thistle. It was captained by the McNeil brothers, Hector McNeil and Neil McNeil. And they landed at the mouth of the Cape Fear River in the fall of 1739. They traveled upstream. It took them about 2 weeks, and they settled in present-day Bladen County. The reason I know that
that's is that on the eastern side of North Carolina?
Oh yeah. Actually, Bladen County is kind of in the middle. And Bladen County was very large, and they since partitioned it into more Cumberland, Anson. But at the time, it was just Bladen. And
sure. So, in searching for your heritage there and the mysteries surrounding your forefather, you suspect he's coming through this voyage there from the Scotland influx to America. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. So he, the reason I know he was on the 1739 maiden voyage was because 2 years later in Bladen County, he petitioned the British Royal Assembly for 30 acres, and he didn't get it until 1753. He petitioned in 1741, didn't get it for 12 years. Don't know why.
Interesting.
But
a lot of turmoil around that time, though, right? It wasn't all Disneyland or Disney Disney-style American history tales, right?
It was a hard life. Much respect to my ancestors and everybody else that lived through those times. But in 1741, the only people living in Bladen County, North Carolina, were Hollywood. They literally settled the area. So the fact that we have Thomas Minyard, petitioning for land 2 years after the boat landed is a pretty good indicator that he was on the boat.
No, I totally agree, and it makes sense that with these connections going into the revolution in the Society of Cincinnati, which was overwhelmingly the Scots-Irish. I want to say it's upwards. I can look it up, but I believe it's in approximately 80% of the forces that fought in the revolution were Scots-Irish. So
on the American side,
as a result of that, most of the society is Scots-Irish.
See, I didn't know that. I mean, I knew it was a large, a good percentage, but I didn't realize that it was that many.
It's the majority for sure. It may not be as high as 80. I've definitely seen some numbers ranging. We'll call it 70. I've seen some numbers now that I think about it ranging around 60. So I don't know that because I don't know anyone's done all the genealogy on this, or maybe they have. Maybe the Mormons have, right? But while you're describing the details of the mystery surrounding your forefather, Thomas Minyard, which does sound very strikingly similar to the kind of the mystery surrounding my forefather there, Abner Vance. So
yeah,
it is a lot of mysteries going on in and around the same area, right, with the Scots-Irish there in North Carolina, because that's allegedly where Abner Vance hails from there in around Surrey County, which he would later allegedly enlist in the army there, and just across the border, just north of Surrey there in Chatham, Virginia, and Pennsylvania.
Well, that was actually common. That was common in those days. In fact, Thomas, one of the Thomases, enlisted in the Virginia militia. Even though he was a North Carolina resident, and the Virginia militia actually hooked up with the Pennsylvania regiment and fought together at Brandywine, Monmouth. But if you look,
and again, technically until I think 1787, that was all Virginia.
Oh, I believe it.
North Carolina, that is. Well, there was a Vance that was one of the delegates to Congress to establish that the state of North Carolina in 1787.
And North Carolina was behind Virginia, basically in every category.
Well, again, it's the Scots-Irish, right? They're the ones. I mean, I know I was actually not familiar with the migration you shared here until you told me about it, because I thought in large part the Scots-Irish all migrated down from Virginia, which. Again, that's tracking some of Clan Vance's, foray into America. Essentially, one large family for the most part, came from Northern Ireland there in the late 1600s to Delaware, and then branched off some to New England, some to Pennsylvania region, and then largely Virginia, then migrating down to North Carolina and South Carolina. So they had a slightly different kind of migration than what you had. So it is interesting that there was these later migrations that these, to me, it speaks of, again, the formation of these armies that do occur and these families that comprise these groups that fight in the wars. But so how is it that, in looking at your history and your Minyard family, how is it that you saw the Society of Cincinnati that caused you to research the society and then locate my podcast on the matters?
So the ancestor that I mentioned, his name was James Minyard. He's my fifth great grandfather. I've verified that. Well, James Minyard, if you go on Ancestry and look at any trees, they're all wrong. Some say we came from England. Some say we came from Ireland, which is not true. But the weird thing about James Minyard, not only was he a brick wall in my family tree, but he also apparently had this French pseudonym that he went by for about 20 years, which I'll get to later. Well, in 1797, the War Department Secretary, William Simmons, corresponded with Captain William Ricard, who we'll be talking a lot about. Simmons needed receipts. There were 4 deserters in Ricard's company, and back then you just don't do that. He placed.
Let me interject real quick. Captain Ricard.
Yeah.
let's do a brief intro on him before we start that
Well,
that narrative, because
actually,
you keep mentioning he's an important
will,
character, and he is an important character. I very much agree with you.
This will introduce Ricard.
Okay, well, I apologize then, because he's when you introduced him to me, I was unfamiliar with Ricard, so it's
nobody knows who he is. And I'm not saying this to brag, but I probably know more about William Ricard than anybody on the planet, maybe other than the government. But
I don't disagree.
But it's not because I'm smart. I'm so smart. It's just I've spent a lot of time researching this guy. But if
I may just interject real quick, once again, I hate to interrupt you before from your narrative there, because if you're getting to that point, but yeah, the one thing I just want to point out that this William Ricard guy, folks should know him. This should be a name. Clearly, when I learned about it, I was like, oh wow, this is not a more common name. Okay, well,
people should definitely know his name.
Yeah, people should. I just want to lay that base for you.
So basically, Ricard, Captain Ricard was an officer in the Revolution. So of course we know what that means. Apparently he was connected. He had direct correspondence, which you didn't really do. You kind of went through the chain of command, but there was direct correspondence with Henry Knox. There was direct correspondence with George Washington, and others I'll reveal later. So he was applying for a cutter position in North Carolina, which is Coast Guard. George Washington had already promised the job to somebody else, so he offered Ricard a recruiting job in North Carolina. The man Ricard replaced was a man by the name of Joseph Kerr. They called him Joseph Kerr, the crippled spy. I'm not saying Ricard was a spy, but what I am saying is the guy that he replaced was. He was a spy for George Washington during the Revolution, and he was replaced by William Ricard, which is no doubt how he met James Minyard. So back to this 1797 correspondence.
Sure.
What I thought was really weird. So fine, the secretary needs receipts. I'm not going to, reimburse you the money until you.
Because he was a paymaster, right?
That was his job, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that seems reasonable then, right?
So Ricard did, in fact, run ads for, there were 4 deserters on the letter. Hardy Macon, Henry Edwards, Thomas Brown, and James Minyard. But the funny thing is, JJ, Ricard didn't place any ads for James Minyard's capture and return, but he did for the other 3, multiple ads.
That's fascinating.
Across multiple states, Kentucky, North Carolina, Tennessee. I mean, Ricard meant business, it seems like, but not one single ad for my grandfather. I'll just call him my grandfather going forward, but he's my 5th grade. But
your forefather, your grandfather, sure, whatever works for you.
But I just thought
no sense in describing 5th grade grandfather every time, right?
Exactly. But I just thought it was just yet another example of what the hell is going on. So now
that's a great point, though. I think that is probably a salient characteristic in your forefather's whole storyline, though, right? In regards to, what seems to be spook activity, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Is the fact that
I didn't, and I just want to make clear just to your listeners, I did not sign up for this. If somebody had told me a year ago I'd be on a podcast talking about the Society of Cincinnati and all the stuff it entails, I would have said you were crazy. But all I can do is just go by what I see, records I see, and I have no agenda. I'm just here to share things I've learned, and I'm not a quote unquote conspiracy theorist, but sometimes stuff is not a conspiracy. Sometimes stuff is just people being assholes.
That's a good point. That is a good point. People do tend to be assholes, and I share your sentiments there, Brad, on your journey, because that's what you just encapsulated there on your journey is, essentially mine. So I was looking through American history, my family's history and whatnot, and found the society. Realized there wasn't much information all readily available on it. Kind of no one really talks about it type of deal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I never asked to be on this journey. You know what I mean? But I did find myself making a podcast and starting to talk about the Society of Cincinnati back in, it's been almost 9 years. It'll be May 2016.
I didn't realize it had been that long. Wow. So
I had a brief hiatus during the cough season of 2020. I was doing some other professional business at the time, and I just decided that was a poor venture in life, and went back to other things and other hobbies such as Operation GCD. But yeah, I started off in the very much same way you're describing.
Yeah. So exactly, and just the fact that our stories overlap in the same areas is just mind-boggling. But
to say the least, especially when you're talking, George Washington's spook activities, because as I've met some folks over the years in communications in my journeys, other distant relatives of Clan Vance, of specifically Abner Vance, because he had somewhere between 17 to 19 kids, depending on accounts, and
we know what his hobby was. Yeah.
Right, couldn't keep a zipper up. And then all the generations past that. I mean, just above me. I mean, I'm there was 9 siblings, my aunts and uncles and whatnot. So, or I'm sorry, 8. So, the big, huge family going on. If you look at the multiple generations there, Abner being my 4th great grandfather, so 19, and then, you look at all the numbers, it gets pretty wild, but, so the stories on some of those more distant branches that for distant branches, I've never met a Vance that I'm related to that's not a first cousin. Like anything past, no, I've never met as a second cousin, Clan Vance, never.
Vance today is tightly wound and threaded. It sounds like that y'all are. It sounds like y'all are staying in the same areas. Maybe breeding with the same families, maybe.
I mean, it's just different pockets. I mean, as far as at least my wing of Clan Vance there from Abner, different pockets, I guess. I don't know. I just think it's odd. I've never met a second cousin.
It is
first cousins once removed, sure, but the
there's got to be a reason for that. I mean, the DNA does not lie.
Well, no, I mean they're out there. I mean, there's no question of them. But I've again communicated through a lot of them through DNA after meeting them through DNA databases. But some of the stories I got there. My point being that not to deter us too far here on a tangent, but my point is some of those stories include that Abner served as a spy and a scout for George Washington, which would explain why he doesn't show up on any company's regiment rolls, right? Which in regards to regiment roles, you found some of that in your journeys with looking through your family trees, right? With some of the notable characters such as Ricard, right?
Well, all of James Miniere's compatriots were on muster rolls, but not him, and they would not have been. James Minyard had a lot of close family names, the Smiths, the Carpenters, the Allgoods, the McHales, and all those guys served. I just can't see a family traveling together when there's not that common bond of serving together and fighting together. And but yet I've never found him on a muster roll, no service record, which is just very strange to me.
Right.
But back to William Ricard, because you had mentioned George Washington, who it has an extra little special meaning to you probably than me. But
I'm a big fan.
Yeah. You know what? I like George. So
to be fair, I was a big fan. I was kind of, strangely enough, I was raised kind of as a big fan of George Washington, and so it was kind of ingrained in my childhood. But I like his politics. You know what I mean? Just on a different note as well. As an adult, he was against political parties. You know what I mean? He was against serving as president. He fought against it for many years as folks were trying to make him king after the war. Folks, that's kind of wiped away in the Disneyland, Disney fairy tale version of American history. But he kind of became president. When the folks wanted him to become king, and folks never wanted to leave office. So there was a lot of ins and outs around that subject. But you know,
ran unopposed, didn't he? His first term, he ran unopposed.
Well, that's what I'm saying. He was kind of appointed, right? That's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
he's kind of, the folks that wanted to make him king, and they were trying to tell him that 8 years later when he said, "No, I'm done here," right? Because you know, he had an election there. You know, was, I guess, 17. I'm getting way off topic here, but I guess 1794 election.
Something like
1790,
that.
1798, I believe, was his
Yeah,
his
it was
term
in
as
that
president.
area. I don't know the exact years, but yeah, that sounds about right. We're close.
Yeah, I could be off by a couple years there, but he maybe I'm thinking of 1790 was no, I believe that's right, because the war ended in 1783. Yeah, 1790, 1789, I guess, right? So the
fighting has been here for a while, but yeah.
Well, yeah, technically, yeah, right. Well, technically, I think the war continued on well through 1812, but nonetheless, there's an argument to be made for that. But you know, George Washington, one thing what I was getting at with his politics, he people think he just, you know, he gets a lot of dictator kind of comments in this day and age, folks who don't understand rights. But nonetheless, he made a very poignant statement regarding political parties that, you know, may as well have been said, you know, by Donald Trump today, right? Or any, you know, or any politician. But I'm just saying, it's kind of the Donald Trump platform is, I hate both of these parties, right?
I think a lot of people would agree with that statement too.
Yeah, that was George Washington's view on party politics. He said that anytime you have party politics, basically those political machines will be used by the nefarious to seize control and power for themselves. Basically, I bastardized the quote, but that's my interpretation of it.
Well, you know, since we're on the topic of George Washington, so William Ricard, and this is what really got me scratching my head and saying, okay, there's something else going on here. William Ricard, the same guy that recruited my grandfather, conducted the military procession at George Washington's funeral. Same guy.
Super important guy then, right? With that role, right?
They could have picked anybody, but they picked him. So that tells me, okay, Ricard was connected. He was probably connected before this 1799, you know, when Washington died, because he's writing the man directly. That just tells me that there's some sort of connection there. What it is, I don't know. That's what we're going to hopefully figure out. So we have William Ricard. I've told you a little bit about his backstory. And how his, you know, connections to George Washington, but he had correspondence with a lot of other prominent people, which I'll reveal as we go forward. I don't want to spoil it, but this man was seemingly in the middle of everything.
Right.
All the things that, or a lot of the things that you discussed in your Cincinnati episodes, in my mind, I'm like, yeah, Ricard was involved in that because of this. He was involved in that because of this. So it's almost like, you know, earlier when I said our stories overlap, they really do. And it's just weird that, not weird, it's pleasant that, you know, that I know I'm not crazy. You know, it's like, okay, somebody else is seeing what I'm seeing.
No, absolutely. And I hear you. No, I enjoy the confirmation of some of the things the salient characteristics of this alternative American history that I've been pointing out that you've independently picked up on, including where our heritage clearly intersects, and that's Rowan County here in Ricard. Ricard was the commander there at one point here, right? Assigned there by Washington, as you point out here on your website.
Yes, sir. He was. Washington
and Abner Vance would get a pay requisition stub that you located. Pointed out to me in 1782, I believe, right?
You can't make this stuff up.
In Rowan County.
In Rowan County, which the man, as far as we know, didn't live, right? Abner never lived in Rowan County.
No record of it until that pay stub. Correct. Yes, that's correct.
I've never seen him on a tax list. So he went over there to get that pay stub, and who knows what else.
Much like your forefather, he's a man of mystery. He is definitely a man of mystery. I don't think he had a French name, but he's a man of mystery.
He did have so he had a French alias, which really, starting off, was the most bizarre thing to me. His alias was John James Joseph Miniere, and when a document was in French, it would be Jean Jacques Joseph Miniere.
So when Ricard met him, what alias was he going under at that time?
As far as I know, he didn't have an alias at this point. Let me rephrase that. As far as I know, when he met Ricard, there was no alias. The alias came after he met Ricard. Now, if I see some documentation that contradicts that, I will post it on my website because I'm all about the truth. But as far as I know, based on my research right now, the alias was post meeting Ricard.
That seems to be an important factor, does it not?
It's a very key element, yes, sir.
Especially when you're talking the French, because the French have their own chapter of the Society of Cincinnati.
Yes, and that is really when I discovered that, and the French just keep popping up in weird places. But I initially treated the two men when I was building my tree. I had a page for both. Joseph Miniere is his own person. James Minyard is his own person. But when you start, and you've looked at enough family trees, I'm sure you know, when you start looking at trees and you see enough of them, when something's just off, you just kind of know. And the trees just weren't making any sense to me. There were names in there that just, like, for example, his wife, James Minyard's wife's name was supposedly a woman named Sarah Carpenter. There's no record that this woman ever even existed. His son James did marry a woman named Sarah Carpenter, but James Jr. But as far as I know, he did not marry a woman named Sarah Carpenter because I found no record that she even exists.
I've seen exactly what you're describing right now in my genealogy work too, specifically around Abner. These activities that go on around him, no one wants to agree on who his parents are. So literally all these changes, like literally every week in the LDS Mormon database,
they don't know. They
are just blowing up changes on that profile.
Yeah, I honestly didn't think I'd find a story as interesting as mine until I met you, because I'm not going to spoil it for your listeners, but just the things that you've told me, like I'm kind of invested now. Like I want to know what happened with this journey you're on.
Well, I feel that I appreciate that. I feel the same way about your Minyard history here, because again, this seemingly spook activity surrounding elements of George Washington and may or may not involve the French side of the society as well. It just seems like a very extremely fascinating tale that I couldn't even imagine that would be discovered. Right, like when you hit me with these details, I'm like, all of these things sound super wild to me. So it's basically it's great to see someone else troubled with the same journey.
Yeah. Hey, what do they say? Misery loves company, right? I'm not the only one. Right now. So when I started to kind of maybe think they are the same person, so shortly after the War Department correspondence, about a year or two later, we find Joseph Miniere in Manhattan. Okay. About a half a mile walking distance from Joseph Miniere's residence in Manhattan was William Ricard on 14 Cherry, and Miniere's shop was on 295 Greenwich. So you just go to Google Maps, like that's about a half a mile. Ricard was only there.
That's an important detail. If I may interject, I just want to stress I think some folks may not find that to be an important detail. The way I look at things, proximity, especially relative to the context of where these men came from, this kind of proximity should not be ignored.
Not because notice it wasn't James Minyard in Ricard; it was Joseph Miniere.
Exactly.
So what really got me going down this rabbit trail was the fact that Joseph Miniere's next door neighbor, or even possibly landlord, was a woman by the name of Catherine Dorr. Her maiden name was Catherine Alexander. She was Lord Sterling. I'm sorry, not maybe it is Sterling, but her father was a prominent Scot. They still called him Sir or Lord, which by that time was more of a courtesy title because they didn't exist. Officially, those titles didn't exist anymore, but they still called him Lord. So he was pretty important. And her mother was a Livingston. So there you go. Yeah. So there you go.
Of the New York, the infamous founding families of New York. One of the founding families of the New York Society of Cincinnati as well. Alexander Hamilton married into the Livingstons, in fact.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
So what year are we talking here with the activities in Manhattan? Speaking of the Livingstons, and Hamilton's obviously there as well, right?
Hamilton's there and Burr's there, but we'll talk about that later.
So what year is this?
So 1799 and 1800, Miniere's on the directory, operating a hardware store. That's an important detail. A hardware store on 295 Greenwich with his partner Voltaire. He was walking distance to Aaron Burr's law office, the Livingston law office, Ricard's residence. There was another one I can't remember, but there was a lot going on in New York City Sixth Ward in this time. So,
and I think that's largely because the machinations of the federal government were still largely existing there from the holdover from Washington's initial seat of government.
And then the central bank, Hamilton was all about the central bank, and he was trying to get that started, which was right there.
Well, you have all those you have all the New York Society members, right? You got Burr, you got Hamilton, you got the Livingston family. These are some of the power players in the New York Society. So they're going to be integral in economics and stuff and policy going on around the area.
The same chapter. Hamilton and Burr were in the same chapter. I'm sure you know this.
They all were, right? That's all the New York chapter there. Those are some of the prominent, not all of them. The Rockefellers have representation in the New York chapter. There's a lot, the Astors. There's a lot of them that, those Dutch families, but nonetheless, the Van Cortlands, don't want to forget them. So I just want to stress though, it's from 1790. You got James Minyard, right, and William. I keep calling him William Ricard. How you pronouncing it?
It probably just depends on where you're from. I call him Ricard, but I don't think there's a right or wrong way to say it.
When you say Ricard, all I picture is that dude from Star Trek, Jean-Luc Picard.
Hey, and maybe that was a nod to Mr. William Ricard.
Mr. Ricard, you never know. So I just think it's important. This is a very important detail, at least one that stuck out to me in learning these characteristics of this whole backstory is these fellas are in Rowan County, North Carolina together in 1790. 1799, William Ricard and James Miniere are living there in close proximity.
Joseph Miniere, yes, sir.
Joseph Miniere. We're living there.
Sometimes he's Joseph, sometimes he's Josh. We'll just call him Miniere.
Right. So yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, because I'll keep messing it up otherwise. I'm horrible with names. That's why I love initials. I'm horrible with names. So that's a pretty stark difference. That's what I'm saying. Like geographically speaking, we're talking about activity in North Carolina. 9 years later, up in Manhattan. Again, it's not improbable that folks would travel these distances at the time, even though they are great distances. It's just odd.
People traveled
together.
More than we realized.
What's that?
People traveled more than we realized.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. That's what. Yeah, that's why I want to make that point, because it does seem like a far distance. Folks did travel, but it is odd though, right? So you have them in the same military. You recruit them in the military in North Carolina, and then you have these individuals in Manhattan. Captain Ricard. What was he? He retired as a captain, right?
Yeah, oddly, after George Washington died, he never got promoted again. In fact, James Wilkinson essentially demoted him.
That's right.
But we'll talk about that when we get to Natchez.
That's right. I forgot about that detail. Yeah, I think it is important to stress that these elements are separated by nearly a decade, and seemingly, I'm sure part of your mystery was like, wow, this doesn't make any sense. But yeah, I mean, if you look at these characters being the same character doing some sort of spook activities, it almost seems like that provides context.
Yeah, and we've only scratched the surface. So the widow, she was a widow. Catherine Dorr was a widow at this time. Her husband had died in 1799 in debtor's prison. His name was William Dorr. He started the first financial panic in this country's history. So, he has that on his resume. And he was a piece of work. Let me tell you,
was that the Wall Street Panic of 1792? I got your website up here, Brad. Is that the Wall Street Panic of 1792? Yes,
and to put this into context for you, when William Dorr married Lady Catherine Alexander, they called her Lady Kitty. George Washington gave her away at the wedding.
Oh,
just a little nugget to chew on. So William Dorr was, and I would be lying if I told you I understood how the scheme worked, but basically he was manipulating the market and screwing over a lot of French people. When the French people got here, they didn't have any land because Dorr swindled them. And this is the same man who, George Washington gave away his wife at his wedding. This is the same man that went into business with Henry Knox, who we'll be talking about. In fact, it was called the Knox-Dorr Purchase. It involved a lot of acreage in Maine. So Dorr was very, very, very connected. In fact, at one time, he was the wealthiest man in the country. Land speculator, of course.
Well, I was going to say that's a great point to make with the land speculation, because that's what the deal with the panic was, right? With these French parcels that he screwed some folks over on with some French folks. So again, French folks, right? I wonder what the society connection is here.
Really screwed the French, yeah. Sorry about that. I mean? Repeat that last part. I'm sorry.
I was just saying that, it almost makes you wonder. You and I have kind of talked offline and discussing some of these narratives in recent weeks and months that there's clearly these weird land speculation deals that they're screwing each other over within the Society of Cincinnati. And the way I looked at this Dorr situation was kind of the same deal, because it's French folks, right? So I wonder what the French connection is. Not the drug connection, like the French, the French connection, but I'm saying like the interaction here with the French folks that got screwed over there. Like, what's the society connection at that point, right?
There is a French connection. Every twist and turn in this story, the French have been there. And we'll talk more about that too. But
I think it's important, especially when you're talking the Miniere, right? Though, and that.
Well, and it's very odd. So Minyard is a French surname. It's not a Scottish surname, which begs the question: then why was a native Frenchman on that maiden voyage with 350 Scots? And the reason I think is because he was valuable in some way. When they got to Bladen County, the captain of the boat, Neil McNeil, he was the captain of that boat. Thomas Minyard owned land adjacent to McNeil. So I think he probably was valuable to McNeil in some way, despite the fact that he was not a native Scot. But the Minyards did not stay in that area very long. The big families, the Scottish, the Frasers, McAllisters, all them, McNeils.
Sure.
They stayed. I mean, there's McNeils and McAllisters on Civil War. That those families stayed. My family did not.
Different mission.
And I think there just wasn't that kinship, maybe, that the Scots had amongst themselves. Maybe because I know a lot of the Scots were Tories, loyalists, and I'm pretty sure Thomas was not. So maybe that was some friction there. I don't really know why they left. I have theories. But back to William Dorr. So now we have Joseph Miniere living next door to this guy's widow, and he just died. And William Ricard is in the vicinity.
Who's already doing spy activity in North Carolina, right?
The guy he replaced was a spy.
Right.
So it's safe to assume.
Right.
But,
In all likely probability, William Ricard being so tight with George, they're likely doing some spook activities.
yeah, they were tight. I mean, you don't. I mean, I'm sure I'm sure you've been a pallbearer at some point in your life. I mean, they don't ask people to do those things that off the street. You have to be close and connected somehow, and the fact that he did that, to me, it speaks volumes.
Sure.
It really does.
I totally agree. Yeah, for sure.
So Manhattan was just the first stop. Miniere was not in Manhattan long. The last record of him in Manhattan was the 1800 census that I mentioned next to Catherine Durr. The same year, Miniere.
Wait, he's living with Catherine Durr in the 1800 census. That's correct?
I don't know. He was so Catherine Durr had to move into a more modest home after her husband died for obvious reasons, and she took in boarders to make ends meet until she remarried. So
Sure,
it is
not that uncommon.
Yeah, it's conceivable that Miniere was one of her tenants, but I don't know that for sure. He could have been the next.
Grounds for further inquiry, huh?
Yeah, but the point is they're next to each other on the census. Well, the census taker didn't like go to one house and then go across town and do it. He just went door to door to door to door to door. So the fact that they're back to back like that tells me that they were either next door neighbors or he was a tenant.
Yeah, I think that's what it implies to me as well. And if she's running a boarding house, which would not be uncommon for a widowed situation like that, I think that's very plausible. And again, I think it's important to know. What's that?
Yeah. Who's coming in and out of that house?
I was going to say, well, that was my next point when you read my mind, Brad. That's a great environment for a spook operation, which William Durr was actually on record for doing, right? Running spook operations for Washington, right?
That's a good way to put it. In fact, I'm stealing that. Spook operation. I like that.
There you go. What I'm implying is a similar situation as to the Abraham Lincoln conspiracy. You had Mary Surratt running a boarding house there in Prince George County, Maryland, which was served as the headquarters for the conspiracy. That's where all the conspirators were coming and going from.
You know, I never made that connection, but that's a very good point. It could have been some sort of safe house. But even if it wasn't a safe house, you had to know that people were coming in and out of that house there, especially after the man died. You know, hey, where's my money? Or maybe somebody needed information. Who knows? But it's not like this was just some run-of-the-mill person that just died. I mean, this was a very
He drafted the U.S. Constitution, right?
He was one of the original signers, yes, sir. And he also was a member of the Society of Cincinnati due to his service as an officer during the Revolution. Now, he had an office job, in fairness. He was not out leading troops, but the fact that he did serve in some capacity made him a member, yes.
Yeah, and I think it shouldn't be ignored that his daughter, Washington was involved with both this entire family, right? With the Kitty Durr, William Durr. They were all seemingly all very connected.
I mean, that's the vibe I'm getting. I mean, you don't give away somebody at a wedding that you just met.
Right.
You know, I mean, you know, because we have to put the human element in this stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, these are just people.
Exactly. No, I think it should be stressed. That's a good point for sure.
Yeah, and so it just makes sense that they would be close. You know, and they ran in the same circles. They were doing the same activities. So yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of crossover there. But just, I guess the take-home points here are okay. George Washington's obviously a part of the story. William Ricard and Joseph Miniere / James Minyard were in Manhattan for a reason. Because in fairness, there were other people up in Manhattan that were probably worthy of being monitored. Aaron Burr, for instance. So yeah, there was a lot going on besides just William Durr there. But later the same year in 1800, Miniere just resurfaces in Charleston, South Carolina. But now he is not running a hardware store with Voltaire. Now he is a music virtuoso, performing at St. Cecilia Society concerts and giving private music lessons on multiple instruments. Can't make this up.
Which the changing career move, sounds kind of spooky.
Well, it's very abrupt and very the juxtaposition between a hardware store and a music store. Miniere sounded pretty versatile.
Yeah. I mean, I think these are at the time maybe not we're not considered as spook operations or covers, but I think these looking back at these are the and other stories of how these things operated at that time. These would be the operations. Boarding houses would be like meeting places for these kind of functionaries, right? To meet, but you'd have functionaries within the local economic footprint. So
musicians have traditionally been spies. It's
independent folks. These people are not. There's no record. Like they're not going any place where there's a record. There's no record of a hardware owner's activities. There's no record of a mutual music virtuoso, right? Like he's not logging in or clocking in anything, right? You know what I mean?
I'm getting scraps, man. Random newspaper ads, random signatures on a document here, but the documents that I would love to find probably don't exist.
That's most likely true, especially with these kind of folks, right? But like it, I think those seem to me, these kind of characteristics jump out to me as these are the type of roles that spook operations spies would be operating in. Again, because they're
that's
they're
what
not,
I would do.
Yeah, well, they're like an independent kind of contractor roles, right, if you will. So that you're dotting you're crossing your own T's and dotting your own lowercase J's in life. So and then again, these people then convene at places like a boarding house again is for their spook activities. These are how the operations have worked, and again, a very similar, again, correlation there is the Lincoln affair.
Oh, absolutely, and now that you mention it, now that you brought it to my attention, I can't believe I missed that detail. But that is a very good point about the boarding house. So we have an abrupt move from New York to Charleston. We have an abrupt career change.
Seemingly overnight, right? This is the next year.
Well, my mind asks questions like this: why Charleston? And by the way, I don't think we need to ignore the fact that New York and Charleston are both part of this story, because that's going to manifest itself almost 100 years later.
Major ports, right? What was the other major port on the East Coast at the time?
Mm-hmm. But we have a north and south dynamic. We have a north and south dynamic, and it's 1800.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, not only do you have a north and south dynamic around New York City, that dynamic continues on through the Civil War there, Brad. If you're familiar with these slave market trades, that still continued out through the ports there in New York City.
Sure, New York was a major. Mm-hmm.
Well, then you also have folks like a lot of carpetbaggers there. The financial power structures behind the Confederacy. Actually, some of those folks and their offspring moved to New York City and were very important people, such as Samuel Untermeyer.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Right? You familiar with the name Samuel Untermeyer?
I am not.
He was the attorney for the Federal Reserve. He represented the New York chapter, some constituents of the New York chapter of the society, the Rockefeller family.
Oh, nice. That's convenient.
Yeah.
So we have this abrupt move. Well, it just so happens, and again, this could be circumstantial, but as we'll see later, I don't think it is. So in 1800 or 01, it's one of the two, Aaron Burr's daughter married a man named Joseph Alston, who would later become governor of South Carolina. After they married, after they
married, his name?
Joseph Alston.
Okay.
I want to say his dad was also named Joseph Austin, but don't quote me on that. So,
are these society? I mean, I'm assuming this is a society family.
I think the Austins are. I'm like 90% sure they are, but I'm not 100% sure. But
Go ahead. I'll look it up while you're talking. I'll bring it up on the screen.
If you marry Theodosia Burr's, I'm sorry, if you marry Aaron Burr's daughter, you're probably at least.
That's what I was thinking, right?
So she marries Joseph Austin. They have their honeymoon in Niagara Falls. Fun fact: the first couple to ever honeymoon there. They removed to Charleston after the honeymoon, which incidentally is when Joseph Miniere leaves Manhattan to move to Charleston. So you could say it's a coincidence. And when I first made the connection on the timeline, I definitely entertained that possibility because you got to look at, you can't just go by one record. You have to have stuff to kind of support it. So I just didn't want to say, oh, he went there because of Theodosia. Now he's spying on the Austins, and but it just so happens.
I like where you're going with this. This is good stuff. And he was she did marry us into the society family down there in South Carolina.
Oh, okay, so the Austins were a society family.
Yeah, her father-in-law was William Austin, and he was a major figure down there. Looks like because he was an early Senate member out of South Carolina after the creation of it.
Okay, yeah. So Burr knew what he was doing. Signing off on that marriage, and
so you're thinking then that this is a result, following Theodosia Burr, huh?
Well, at first I didn't, because
sure.
I mean, maybe he just wanted to move to Charleston. I mean, people have the right to move, right?
It is a free country.
Well, that's debatable, but right. Yeah, it is. Well, so okay, so now we have Joseph Miniere in Charleston. Okay, great. So, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit because there's a lot of stuff about Ricard that we need to talk about. But
I was gonna say we could just lay the baseline. You're doing a great job laying the baseline for these characters. It's I like we were going with the connecting the northern and the southern chapters too. I was not familiar with this relationship, so the South Carolina chapter has been of very much interest to me of late as well. Looking at a lot of these things that you and I have discussed, there's a lot of stuff coming out of that chapter.
You brought something to my attention that I didn't know, that the first Scottish Rite Lodge was actually started in Charleston. I did not know that.
Oh yeah, well that's when you were talking about your the French nature of Minyard, the surname Minyard, but your heritage all pointing to being Scottish. I think that makes a lot of sense if you track your family's history. Not that you can necessarily, but through Freemasonry, because it was a Scotsman in 1721, I think, that brought Freemasonry to France. It was Scottish Freemasonry.
Highland Scott, very key point there. Big cultural difference between
the Highlands. He Frenched his name up too, didn't he?
I just wanted
to change. His name was Ramsey, but he changed it from Ramsey to Ramsay.
Okay, and now who is Ramsey?
He's allegedly a member of the Priory of Sion, friends with Isaac Newton. And,
really?
Alexander Pope. The French kind of luminaries at the time as far as culture and science and stuff goes.
Every time I talk to you, I learn something, man. I need to start taking notes when I talk to you.
but his name was Andrew Ramsey, but he changed it to Ramsay when he moved to France and brought Freemasonry there. He's the guy that introduced Freemasonry to France. I'll bring when you. It's
a key detail. The fact that he made his last name sound Frenchy. That seems to be a trend, doesn't it?
That's what reminded me of some of your stuff, because I was like, well, I mean, there was some stuff going on like that at the time. In fact, a major figure that brought this stuff over there to France, as far as esotericism or occultism, he's a major figure. He doesn't really talked about, but he's a major figure. He kind of Frenched up his name too.
I guess it was trendy in the day. Who knows? So what's interesting to me? So we have a coincidence. Ricard and Miniere in Manhattan. Okay, could be a coincidence. Well, in 1804, on the Charleston City Directory, we have a William Ricard living in downtown Charleston. You could make the argument that it is a different William Ricard. In fact, the first time I saw it, I assumed it was. So I didn't put him on the. I didn't include that in the story. Well, later I happened to find Andrew Jackson, and we haven't even talked about him yet. But I came across Andrew Jackson's journal, and there was an entry in the journal where he had paid Ricard an X amount of money to do some alterations on his uniform. So Captain William Ricard is how he put it. So I'm thinking, well, I guess this is the same Ricard because he listed his profession as a tailor. Well, when he was living in Manhattan, he listed it as a mariner, which is also true because remember he had applied for the Coast Guard position.
Sure.
But now he's a tailor. Well, he's not lying; he is a tailor. So we have Ricard and Miniere now in Charleston together at the same time, and now we have to look at who's in Charleston because what a lot of people may not realize is the 1800 election when Burr tied Thomas Jefferson. Well, in those days, the runner-up was vice president. They didn't have running mates. Well, they tied. There was some speculation that Burr, which, by the way, they were all doing this, so this is not exclusive to Burr. I'm not singling Burr out or picking on him, but there was some speculation that he was trying to manipulate the South Carolina vote because it was that close. As we learned, it ended up being a tie. I mean, the guy was just close to being president, and he was doing some spooky stuff down in Charleston trying to get these votes to get him elected. So obviously he didn't. Jefferson did, but so we just have a lot of activity going on in Charleston. We have Ricard there. We have Burr's daughter, the Austin Miniere, and Miniere was also in Charleston in 1804. There was a slave document, transaction document between Miniere and another guy. So we have Ricard and Miniere in Manhattan at the same time, and then we have them in Charleston at the same time. And then the backdrop is just all this stuff going on with land speculation and presidential elections.
Oh, for sure. I think you're 100% onto something here. I mean, this is some when you were saying that when you found my work that confirming a lot of the same details you were saying. I mean, what you're describing here, what you just outlined here, Brad, is exactly what I've been describing on a more of a strategic level. This internal feud between the Society of Cincinnati, membership within the society, right? A civil war, if you will. And
I believe so. Yeah, I mean, because just so many signs point to that. It's just people within this little group just aren't getting along, and then it reverberates out to.
Well, right, and you're dealing with Burr's daughter here, and that Civil War manifests its first public appearance, rears its first ugly head in the form of Aaron Burr murdering Alexander Hamilton.
That might be one thing we don't 100% agree on. I
know we have some opposing viewpoints on that, so I wanted to bring that up.
Oh, for sure. And hey, look, I'm not saying I'm right. I just think that sometimes things just get out of control and people's tempers flare up. And we know Hamilton was definitely a hothead. And Burr just had enough. And then Hamilton said something about Theodosia at a dinner party. It got back to Burr, and he said, "That's it. I'm done with this asshole." And we all know what happened. But I do at least entertain other viewpoints, because if Hamilton was really this was his legacy, and it was either you or Recluse that pointed out that it could have been some sort of he's like a self-sacrifice thing, like some ritualistic, weird stuff that we don't know about.
Yeah, I'm open to the idea. I believe that was Recluse's suggestion.
Yeah, and that is very possible, and I'm believing that.
They love rituals. They love. Columbia is a sacrificial god in a sense. She's a war goddess.
Right.
she's they've combined like Hecate, and I'm bastardizing it because Reckless and I discussed it probably in the podcast you're referring to from the farm. But yeah, it's he has a better understanding of it. But yeah, it's like Diana, Hecate, a number of these goddesses that have been wrapped up into forming the goddess of Columbia. That's just seemingly the Society of Cincinnati's goddess head.
Yeah, they really love this lady. Statue of Liberty, I would say, argue is this lady.
Brought to us by the French Society, French chapter of the society, right?
There you go. Always the French, right?
Shocker, right?
So we have them in South Carolina. Oh, go ahead.
Well, no, well, I just think that I'm just trying to kind of put some points here in what you're describing here relative to the Burr and Hamilton situation. And I'm not going to discount some personal matters being associated with these situations, but the way I look at it is American historians today, they claim that Aaron Burr, subsequent to these activities of the gentleman's duel, right, between him and Hamilton, right? That's the way it's sold. That after this, that over America, it's they call it the Burr coup conspiracy. This is one of the as far as conspiracy culture goes on the interwebs, this is a one of America's I'm not gonna say it's their first conspiracy. One of America's first conspiracies, though, one of its earliest conspiracies. No one really talks about, right? But I know you're in our discussions. You're very familiar with it, and again, you brought some new details and elements to my brain hole here regarding Theodosia Burr and these interrelations with the South Carolina chapter. I think, and again, the idea that these military operations are seemingly following these people just makes sense to me. I mean, I think it paints a very reasonable narrative of what's going on here.
Follow the money, follow the guns.
And I mean, you're talking about New York being the epicenter of power for these northern chapters, the northern side of the society.
Absolutely.
Charleston's going to be the epicenter of power and activity for the southern chapters.
And it was, and may still be, probably still is.
I suspect it still is. Yeah.
Largely the one that brought to my attention about how there was a discrepancy between South Carolina's spin and the other states' spin on, like right before the Civil War, the South Carolina was the only state that didn't show up to the society meeting. But then on the South Carolina chapter website, they say they're the only ones that did show up. So both can't be true.
Well, I'm glad you pointed that out there, sir, because as I think I've mentioned numerous times in my recent conversations over the last year or so on the society, they've been making, when I say they, I mean these various chapters in their websites have been making alterations to their stories and what's on their website. So there has been this now disagreement, because it used to be Georgia. The old narrative was Georgia. I think it was Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia, and North Carolina. They all said, and we're out.
I think South Carolina was first, and then the other three that you mentioned followed suit.
Yeah, but now there's some disputing narratives even amongst their own, quote unquote biographies of these organizations. So I find that fascinating. And when I publish this, I'm not trying to. I just want to point out I'm not trying to talk shit about any of these activities, because I do get emails from these people. When I say these people, I mean like membership of the society. I have had folks reach out to me.
Really?
Yeah. I mean they're courteous communications. I mean I've had one fellow offered to provide me a membership list that I was way off. I'm like, all right, bud, I appreciate it, but like I'm good. I'm good on my own.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting that they reached out to you.
Yeah, I'm not, and I don't know if I've ever tried to talk shit about it. I'm my goal, much like you said, is in your journey, is I'm just trying to tell the story that I see that no one's talking about.
I have no skin in the game either way. If my attitude was, if Joseph Miniere and James Minyard are the same person, great. If they're not, great. I didn't really. I was going with the information just basically, and there was a point I wanted to make about the French. It'll come back to me. But yeah,
while you're thinking of the French things, so let me put a book in here on what my points are of the North and South and the Burr situation that I've and the Ricard Miniere situation that I find very fascinating here in this kind of overall narrative.
We haven't even gotten to Tom Lynn yet.
right. So if Burr's plotting this coup, which I assert he is, in step one and that coup, which again historians recognize, they don't just recognize step one. Step one was murdering Alexander Hamilton, the President General of the Society of Cincinnati. This is after George Washington was murdered 4 years prior. In my assessment, he was murdered 4 years prior at the convention of the Society on July 4th, 1799. He was poisoned. Died 6 months later in December.
You told me there was a
deathly ill the entire time, and didn't have a last will and testament until he got back from that meeting. All the chapters convened in Philadelphia, and he then appointed Alexander Hamilton as the new President General. I think he was poisoned. I think Hamilton was murdered a few years later in the official Burr coup conspiracy that they don't recognize that event. And I think the fact that George Washington's spook apparatus appears to be tracking the Burrs in the years preceding that is very interesting to me, along with the South Carolina connection.
Oh yeah, because we haven't even gotten to Burr's River Tour yet, and Natchez and Mississippi Territory, and who they had tracking him. The man who was tracking him is very interesting.
That's what I'm saying. So I think what you've identified here is a network tracking the Burr family and constituents preceding those years, right?
And the weird thing not the weird thing, and I don't want to sound like a Burr supporter here because they were all assholes. Yeah, they were. But Burr, honestly, I feel Burr was doing what they were doing, and he may have just been cutting into their actions, and they wanted to render him irrelevant because it's not so much the activities that Burr was doing, it was the nature of his apprehension, the fact that there were 2 trials. It's almost like whether he was guilty or not, it reeked of a witch hunt to me.
Sure. Well, I mean, and it's certainly possible, I suppose, and what I'm implying and my theorizing the situation is that he's obviously a front man. So, I mean, he is a front man for this coup. He's not the leader of the coup. I think Wilkinson is a great character you point out that comes along later in this narrative.
He was the leader but they couldn't get him.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. But nonetheless, Burr was the front man, and tracking. He's a major figure in the movement there. So tracking him and his family and their constituents, especially when they're marrying into the southern side there, I think that's very fascinating, because I've told you my theories on these people as they get banished from America following the Burr conspiracy. They just happen to set up shop in the regions that would later become the elements and power centers of the Confederacy.
Oh wow, that is interesting. Yeah, we'll have to talk more about that.
Yeah, that's further down the line. But you're you're bringing in some great details in my mind here, and laying a great groundwork in your heritage, tracking your heritage through these activities. That no one talks about. Again, I've never heard the name William Ricard. He brought it to my attention, and
nobody had. Yeah, no. Nobody had. I hadn't. I'd never heard the name.
And it seems like there's a spy apparatus tracking these Burr and co-conspirators in the years preceding the quote unquote official start of their coup.
When Burr got to the Mississippi Territory, and I'm jumping way ahead now, but William Ricard's aide de camp, so to speak, was a guy by the name of John Alexander Davidson. His father was William Lee Davidson, that died at that battle in 1783. I can't remember the name of it, but it was in North Carolina at like the courthouse or something. But his dad was a general. So Davidson was Ricard's second in command. Well, in 1799, Ricard requested furlough from Wilkinson. Wilkinson didn't respond, so he broke chain of command and wrote directly to Alexander Hamilton requesting furlough, saying that he needed to, quote unquote, settle accounts up north and this was 1799, the same year that he was in Packed Up North in Manhattan. So he was
Right.
doing more than settling accounts. And of course, later, George Washington died. But when Ricard went on, when Ricard went on furlough, he put his second in command in charge, John Alexander Davidson, who was probably more than qualified. Well, years later, in 1807, when Burr was doing his river tour, as I call it, when he got to the Mississippi Territory, the governor of the territory, last name was Meade. I can't remember his first name, but Davidson's outfit, his company, was Meade's personal squadron. I don't know how that exactly worked, but they answered only to the governor. It was like his personal. So when Burr got,
was this because it was a territory at the time, right? So like,
probably, yeah, I was thinking that
loosely governed province, if you will.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that. So when Burr got down there in 1807, the governor Meade ordered his personal dragoon company that was commanded by Davidson, who was a captain at this point. Well, Davidson was ordered by Meade to go through Aaron Burr's boat to basically spy on him, see what he's up to. 2 weeks later, Burr was arrested in the Mississippi Territory, present day Mobile County, Alabama, I think.
Yep.
But this is the same guy that was Ricard's second in command when Ricard's going up to Manhattan to essentially spy on Burr, I guess, among other people. But
it seems like it, right? That's another great example, then, right?
Yeah, that's just quite a coincidence to me. I mean, it very well could be, but that is quite a coincidence because I had a feeling that Burr was at the. Something told me, and I couldn't. But it's like Burr just kept coming up, and I read his bio. I mean, the guy was brilliant. Actually, he never lost a case. Had more charisma in his pinky fingers than Bill Clinton probably had in his whole body, and he was pretty charismatic. Good ladies man,
whose kill list was higher, his or Bill's?
Yeah, I would say Burr by far. Yeah,
Burr had a bigger kill list, the Aaron Burr kill list.
I would say, yeah. But the guy was just brilliant, and he's kind of a fun guy to root for in a way because he is the villain, and but I'm not going to dispute Burr wasn't doing anything shady because I'm sure he was, but Burr was doing what Hamilton was doing, what Washington was doing, what Jefferson was doing. They were all doing this crap, and I think they wanted Wilkinson and couldn't get him, and they didn't find out later that he was a spy for the Spanish, who we haven't even talked about yet, who were major players. The Spanish actually were bigger players than history may give them credit for during this time period. But so yeah,
I mean, everything you're describing that makes so much sense to me. Again, in these more meta narratives that I've been trying to paint on these subjects on Operation GCD when I discuss the society, and the Spanish are a great example, including in that whole narrative. Because what I see with Burr is, and you make some great points that they're all part of the society. They're all they're involved in the same political and economic shenanigans. May have been competing, want to take them out. Those are some good points there for sure. I look at it though as the interests. Who are the moneyed interests in the matter, right? Like I'm a money guy.
Hey, because that's normally that'll take you to the truth if you follow the money.
I believe so. I mean, I was a skill set that I was blessed with, I suppose, because at an early age I was managing large scale budgets for the headquarters there for the Air Force there in DC. So
nice.
At the age of 29. So it's a skill set that I just comes natural to me. But yeah, in doing so, I analyze everything that way, but specifically crime, because you're going to find crime, and that's what we're talking about here, especially in the murder of Alexander Hamilton, right? We're gonna find the money and interest, right? We're gonna find the who benefits, who what's the impetus behind these actions.
So you're thinking that Burr may have eliminated Hamilton because he was a business rival. That's
no, I think that's, you're mentioning it before. Yeah, business rival. I think that's a good suggestion, and it is business, right? At the end of the day, it is business what we're talking about.
Right.
But
yeah. Broad term business. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it's money though, but right. I break it down just calling it money. So what are the moneyed interests? And Burr was getting financing from European interests, anti-American European interests.
Yeah, Harmon Blennerhassett. He was an Irishman. I'm sure connected.
Major financial figure, and he was getting finances from numerous royal seats there in Europe.
Oh, I have no doubt. Burr definitely had European connections. I mean, you know where he went when he left America? He went to France for a while and came back.
No, I think these are important details because, again, it's these French and Spanish forces that would later try to take over America during the Civil War. Again, in a more of a strategic analysis of these Burr factions who later set up there would become the power centers of the Confederacy in the South, a couple decades later, 40, 50 years later, right? And then they're teaming up with the French and the Spanish, right? And the French have long hated the French chapter of the society. They threw them in jail. They guillotined some of them. And this was after the Revolution. Because the king, the guy that became king after the Revolution, he was a member of the Society of Cincinnati, cousin of Lafayette, the head of the society over there, and he immediately turned on them. He banished Lafayette.
Well, you talking about Mr. Bonaparte? You talking about Mr. Bonaparte?
I'm talking about King Louis Philippe II, I think it is, from House of Bourbon.
I thought it was Napoleon.
Well, no. So King Louis Philippe has an interesting storyline narrative relative to the society. Again, to emphasize the importance of the French aspects of this stuff, because again, I think that's a very interesting detail in the Miniere narrative.
It's a key element. Yeah, it's a key element.
Yeah, the French chapter of society is far more accepted in America than it ever has been in France. And even again, speaking of the Civil War within the society, right? So King Louis Philippe II fought in the Revolution over there initially, right? Then he hightailed it out of town after the Revolution. So we're talking like 1793, I believe it is. He's allegedly living over there in Claremont County, Ohio, under an assumed name, in the town started by General Lafayette's aide-de-camp, Major Neville, John Neville. He's living in Neville, Ohio, as a school teacher, and then he's in exile from France following the Revolution. Again, the society was much in exile as well, and many of them were later imprisoned and guillotined in the aftermath, and some by King Louis when he takes power finally, following the fall of the former King Louis and
the one that got beheaded.
Yeah, what's her name? Wow, I can't think. Oh, Marie Antoinette, right? So, after then there was turmoil and whatnot. King Louis in exile at this point, right?
She never said these activities. She never actually said "Let him eat cake." That's like a fairy tale.
Right. Well, a lot of fairy tales. That's what I'm getting around here with a lot of fairy tales around this stuff. And, no one recognizes the turmoil within these organizations. Again, that founded America, but were integral, and they were the folks behind the French Revolution. So I'm just going to, as I'm rambling about this guy, I'll just bring him up real quick on the screen so I don't get these details completely wrong off the top of my head. But yeah, so he's in exile and living supposedly. So his cousin is Lafayette, the head of the French chapter of the society. Lafayette's aide-de-camp, as you were mentioning aide-de-camps before, he was the his aide-de-camp was John Neville, Major John Neville, which was the son of George Washington's aide-de-camp, Colonel Neville. The Nevilles, they're an important factor in a lot of the society stuff as well. And again, we're all circulating George Washington and General Lafayette, right? But so allegedly, this dude's living in there as a deposed future king of France,
teaching school, Ohio.
Yeah, in this weird town in Ohio, right? That's just connected, again to George Washington, right? So, and he's living under an assumed name. I'm painting out all these details to emphasize there's a lot of spook activity surrounding George Washington in this era, right? You've painted out a number of them already. Here's another example right here of another guy. Again, John Neville's the son of George Washington's aide-de-camp, Colonel Neville. So there's and George and Lafayette couldn't be closer friends. Lafayette was much younger than him. George was very much his mentor.
Well, and I've always thought it was just strange that, the French, they didn't help us out of the goodness of their heart. What was in it for them? That's what I always kind of come back to is,
well,
how did they benefit from this? What kind of
if you look at it solely as the French, you're not going to find much of an answer there, because really what it is, it's old warring factions. So, we're talking the Protestant aspects of these nations, right? The Jacobites, the Huguenots, these families come from the Knights Templar. They would then produce the members of the society. The Huguenot, the French society is largely Huguenot, and the American chapters of the society are largely, as we mentioned earlier, Scots-Irish Protestants, descendants of the Templars.
A lot of parallels.
Descendants of the Jacobites after that, right? Templars, Jacobites, society, Templars, Huguenots, society for France, right?
When you say there's some parallels there between the Jacobites and the Huguenots, it's just based on just the religion aspect and the political aspect. I've always thought that there were more parallels between the two than maybe history is.
Well, there's certainly examples of them fighting wars together, and they both share the same ideologies, religiously speaking, against the Vatican, right?
Yeah, the Protestant angle for sure, which is a huge backdrop. Protestant versus Catholic is like a huge backdrop in this somehow.
Yeah, so the guy I was referring to is the King Louis Philippe.
Mm-hmm.
He fought in the Revolution. This is just another example of some of that again, especially the French side of this, the quote unquote civil war within the society. He fought in the Revolution at the age of 19. He was promoted to lieutenant general by the age of 19.
Wow.
He fled to Switzerland in 1793. All right, so I was pretty. I think I said 1793. I'm nice. I like to say circa, because that way then folks can't get on me about the date. So, but I think I was right on that one. And so then he went into exile for 21 years, right? And then he when he was allegedly teaching school there in Claremont County, Ohio, and Neville, Ohio, right, which is a hotbed of mound activities. George Washington surveyed that area as a teenager. A lot of George Washington and other weird activity in that region for sure.
So that's another subplot in this whole thing is the mounds that I'd never even heard of until I started listening to your podcast. Like, well, what's going on with these mounds? And I started researching it, and like, there's something to this mound stuff, because the people that built them apparently aligned them with the stars somehow. They had this technology that maybe we don't have now, and the way they were built, and the styles. It's just another weird element to the story.
Oh, and the society loved mounds. There's no question about it. Not just George, but the rest of his officers as well. So
you're gonna tell me that you don't have no black cats, no Roman candles, or screaming mimes?
No.
Oh, come on, man. You don't got no lady fingers, buzz buttles, snicker bombs, church burners, finger blasters, gut busters, zippity doodads, or crap flappers?
No, I don't.
You're gonna stand there, owning a fireworks stand, and tell me you don't have no whistling bungholes, no spleen splitters, whisker biscuits, honky lighters, hoosker do's, hoosker don'ts, cherry bombs, nips and dazers, with or without the scooter stick, or one single whistling kitty chaser?
I mean, I just think what what you're describing, and again, a strategic aspect of this Burr surrounding the Burr activities, William Ricard, James Minyard, Joseph Miniere,
Weird.
this apparent apparatus following the Burr conspiracy. Again, I think what you're describing is things I've already kind of painted out here on Operation GCD from a meta strategic analysis of these civil wars, right? This ongoing kind of, starting way back then, but I assert it's going on still today. But this is some finer details and greater examples of that same narrative that I've been trying to describe.
And Rowan County, you'd mentioned it earlier. Wouldn't you say, just from our conversations and just our research, that there's something spooky going on in Rowan County, North Carolina?
Yeah. So all of these, no, 100%. When you hit me with all those details of Rowan and then the Abner Vance pay requisition there, I'm like, all right. So I look further into Rowan, and I mean, this is just way too much, right? I mean, it's over the top. So I look more into Rowan. Not only they got mound stuff there, obviously, but all of these folks there seem to be surveyors, right? They're all frontiersmen and surveyors,
and that's their hub.
And that seems you're exactly right. That seems to be their hub, because that was really the western edge of America at the time, right?
And George Washington in 1781 visited the town of Salisbury, which is in that county. Which is random.
Was he visiting some kinfolk there?
Nobody really. History has not really told me why he was there, other than it was just part of his. He was coming back home and he swung through Salisbury.
Well, according to that 1782 pay requisition you found and sent to me there for Abner Vance, he was living there in 1782. So maybe George was visiting some kinfolk.
I'm sure they at least had a conversation, I would think, if they're in the same town, because he had to have known who he was.
Well, I think for a lot of reasons he knows who he was, but you're right, within that town, as far as these operations go, like, so Abner's there, he's a frontiersman surveyor, right? He after the war there, right? So he, from my understanding, again, from stories I've gotten from other wings of Clan Vance, of Clan Abner, he was trained by Daniel Boone in these activities to be a frontiersman and a surveyor, and then allegedly Abner would allegedly train folks like Davy Crockett, and all of these men come from Rowan County, right?
And, yes, sir, and surveyors. Something's going on with the surveyors. We see a lot of that, don't we, in our research? So what are they surveying? What are they looking for?
Absolutely.
Right.
These aren't dumb men. That should be stressed with the term surveyor. They don't have lasers and sticks and computers to do these things. These men are using mathematics, and they're getting in canoes and hiking places. You know what I mean? This is not an endeavor that is undertaken with any ease.
No GPS in those days. So
yeah, there's no Garmin's, right? Yeah.
Not exactly. So just the fact that George Washington visited there and Ricard was stationed there, and then Abner Vance, and something I just discovered recently was I can't remember the guy's name, but he was a Knights Templar from France who died in Rowan County, North Carolina. Lived his last decade or so in Rowan County, North Carolina, and this is a Knights Templar descendant. It's just
makes sense to me. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, well, initially it was weird, but yeah.
Oh no, it's definitely weird on its surface. But as far as the narratives that my perspective, the narratives the lineage and these folks, the family trees of these folks, makes a lot of sense to me. And speaking of the French side, again, like the French side of the society has been far more accepted in America. You mentioned the Bonapartes. Well, Napoleon Bonaparte, a member. His brother was not, but his brother's family, very prominent here in America. And there is a conspiracy theory that exists that it was Napoleon that came to America and died, and set up shop, had children over here, and not his brother. So I often wonder if that conspiracy theory is true, because I believe it's Charles Bonaparte, He came to America again, very accepted amongst the society. I'm sure as a result of his brother, but he never served, so I don't think he was a member by any stretch. I suspect again though the relations with the French chapter and his brother and whatnot is what gave him, again, unless it was Napoleon, but on paper it's Charles, I believe, and then his descendants are very prominent members of American society still today, including, maybe I'm getting the names wrong, Charles Bonaparte, I believe. Maybe they're both Charles. Anyhow, Napoleon's brother, his descendants, started the FBI.
Interesting.
Yeah.
See, I just
so very prominent in American culture, right? It's technically the bureau that preceded the FBI, the Bureau of Crime, I believe it was called. They had the Bureau of Drugs, I think, and the Bureau of Crime, I believe, and they mashed them together for the FBI. Hoover ran one, Bonaparte ran the other.
I'll be dang. It was Napoleon's descendant. Wow.
Well, I mean, you know what? That's my noted theory on the matter, right?
Or his brother. But yeah. But he's
I mean, it's either his brother's descendant or Napoleon's descendant. I would argue it's Napoleon's descendant because there is, again, this, I don't know, I don't recall the details. There's a whole theory that Napoleon was the one that came over here and his brother was the one that went into exile and died on an island.
If you told me that a year ago, I would have said no way.
What's that?
But if you told me that a year ago, I'd say no way, but nothing surprises me anymore.
Well, when you're dealing with the society and spook activity, as we've been discussing here, I mean, and hiding French folks in America under assumed names, well, why wouldn't you swap brothers, right? Because again, that brother that came here, his descendants became very prominent in America, including this fellow right here.
Somebody made a good point. I think it was my dad.
Charles Joseph Bonaparte.
So if James Minyard was in fact Joseph Miniere, my question was, well, how did he learn French so fast to be able to do these espionage activities? And my dad made a good point. He said maybe he already knew it. And so that just opened the whole. I'm like, well, that would actually make a lot more sense if he actually
maybe that's what qualified him for the job too, right? They're like, hey, you speak French, huh?
Speaks French, and apparently he was musically inclined, which runs heavily in the males.
Deluge bread?
What's that? No, I hear you. Hello?
Brad, you still there? I lose you?
Yeah. No, I'm here.
Oh.
Can you hear?
Yeah, it cut out for a minute on my end. Yeah, that's a great point because, if he spoke French already, that's a great, like, hey, kid, you speak French. We got a job for you.
And, the musical thing initially was a little bizarre to me, but when I sat down and thought about it, musical ability runs in the males and the females. But on my paternal line, unfortunately, I didn't get this trait to the degree of some of my family members. But we have a lot of virtuosos in our family that are just naturally gifted at music. And I always say everything's hereditary. Well, it came from somewhere. So, there's that, and there's just these little weird, it's just these things that that make you think, well, maybe there was something of this French stuff, but my DNA says I have no French ancestry, but it's also illegal to get your DNA tested in France for genealogy reasons. So there's really no database to compare my or anybody's DNA to. So, which kind of makes you wonder, what are they trying to hide? What would that open Pandora's box if French people could just start getting their DNA tested? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure what that's about. I wasn't aware of that until you told me about it.
Yeah, it's just, of all the civilized countries, France is the only one that you can't get your
I heard
DNA
Israel, but I didn't know that one, yeah.
Oh, it's Israel? Okay.
I've heard Israel's one of those countries. I'm sure there's more of them, but yeah.
That actually makes sense.
So this was the youngest brother of Napoleon the First, Napoleon Bonaparte, and his grandson was Charles Joseph Bonaparte. He was the U.S. Secretary of the Navy, later the U.S. Attorney General, and during the Attorney General, he created the Bureau of Investigation. Okay, so I call it the Bureau of Crime. So once again, I'm in the right ballpark, wrong department.
Well, I see where you're going with this, though, and that would definitely warrant further investigation for sure.
But the detail. So, you've done a great job unpacking these details, Brad, and I think this is a great baseline we're setting here. And I want to kind of summarize some of the characters here, but I also want to point out these salient characteristics you pointed out to me, which reminds me of these other activities. So you're pointing out, again, the spook activity, the society, right? The French names, folks changing their name relative to the, hiding stuff from France back and forth, right? So
Yeah.
all of these characteristics you've described here are part of your narrative and your tale of your heritage here in this journey. And again, these are all things that I can point to have occurred within these same elements of the society of Cincinnati relative to American and French relations within that society, to including apparently alleged fake deaths of Napoleon. Again, that man's descendants being prominent figures in America, which makes a lot more sense to me if it was Napoleon's grandson, right? Kind of deal. And
common theme in this tale.
Lots of common themes. And again, I think it should not be ignored, all this spook activity surrounding George Washington. So he's known. Folks have written some books. I have one somewhere here. George Washington Spies. It should be known though that Washington has an established record of spy network. What we're describing here though, I think, is a far more larger apparatus that no one wants to talk about in this secret war within the society, because again, you've identified all of this surrounding the early constituents of the Burr coup.
We're picking up on details because it's our family and we care. So of course we're going to dig deeper, and just so happens that we're both pretty good at research and we make inferences and connections, and you just can't ignore it. It's just when the same thing just keeps happening over and over, and the same name in these weird places that have no business being there. Quebec, Canada, and Rowan County, North Carolina are probably two of the most different places on Earth, but yet we have families that are in both places. The lens that we will get to, but it just doesn't.
Well, I was going to ask you. I was going to say, did you want to, when we're drawing the close here on the conversation today here in part one, did you want to, when we recap these characters, did you want to discuss Lynn or do a brief introduction?
I'll do a brief introduction on John Lynn, but we'll get into him in the next one, just so I can lay it out in full.
So that sounds like a good plan. Do you want to, then let's do a recap on the characters here then we've already discussed before we and we'll close out with the cliffhanger on the John Lynn situation, which is as far as the numerous ins and outs of this situation, Lynn brings an entirely different element to it.
He's on his own level. This guy, man.
So we have William Ricard, right?
William Ricard.
Definitely within the inner circle of George Washington, a captain in his army, member of the society. Paul Bear there at his funeral, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're connected.
Oh, deeply, right? He's there in Rowan County as well, right? He recruits your forefather.
And that's the takeaway I want your listeners to basically remember, is that Ricard recruited James Minyard, and after they met, Joseph Miniere appears out of thin air, apparently,
right?
Because there's no genealogy on him. I've looked. It's like he just appeared out of thin air. And now
I've looked as well, sir, and he does seemingly a man without a past, and I'm familiar with these man with a looking at these historical genealogical journeys of a man with no past, not just Abner Vance. He's one of the folks in my tree with no past, but Miniere, he's never passed.
Yeah, it's frustrating too when you're doing, because again, like I said earlier, I didn't sign up for this. I was just trying to do my family tree, but now I'm talking about.
I know precisely what you mean.
yeah, but hey, I'm in now, so let's
you're stuck.
Let's take it all the way, bro.
So that is the biggest. I think that's one of the key takeaways of establishing the baseline of the characters in this whole narrative is there is no Joseph Miniere prior to, James Minyard being recruited by William Ricard?
I believe William Ricard is the reason there is a Joseph Miniere.
And William Ricard is already serving in Rowan County, North Carolina, in a capacity that his predecessor was a confirmed spy for Washington.
Joseph Kerr, the crippled spy, yes, sir.
Yeah, one of the established, again, as we were talking, the quote unquote established Washington spy network. We're just describing the apparatus surrounding that and underneath it.
And I'm pretty
so
good at,
you've identified a guy literally taking over the command of that position from an established spy, recruiting your forefather into the army, into seemingly then all of a sudden this Miniere character pops up, who then follows Ricard around America, it seems, right?
In prominent places with prominent people that are heavily tied to our story. Yes.
So what? It's a great narrative, and especially very prominent people when you were discussing William Duer, right?
William Duer, Aaron Burr, and we've only scratched the surface. I haven't even told you about the infamous account book they found on William McLeod's boat after he died. They went through his drawer and they found this book with all these names in it. That apparently he was some sort of bookie or loan guy, but he just came over from Scotland after the Revolution, and all of a sudden he's doing business with these major names from up north. I actually started counting today. I'm not done. I've counted 7 society guys in the ledger book so far. 2 of the guys that borrowed $5,000 from him were indicted on the Yazoo land scandal in Georgia, which unfortunately my grandfather's compatriots were a victim of. They had to leave Georgia due to the Yazoo land scandal.
A lot of those land scandals within the society, for sure. So that's another. I think that's another salient characteristic in the ongoing narrative with these folks and analyzing some of the feuds and activities.
To me, that's the central theme is land. This is all about land, about land, and anybody that tells you different is deceiving themselves. This is all about land.
No, I agree. I agree. That's why I think that's why the European interests were backing Aaron Burr. It was all about land. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But so not Burr, but when you're dealing with Duer here, Duer is again another interesting character that is not often described in American history. A signer of the U.S. Constitution, running George Washington's spy operations there in Manhattan, as you point out.
He launched the program. He launched the espionage program.
There you go. I was gonna say, as you point out, he's kind of the forefather, right? In that
which is ironic because his program actually went back and spied on his wife, but yeah, he started it.
Yeah, and then you got again the deep Washington connections with Duer and his wife, and then you got Miniere seemingly living next door, or perhaps at the boarding house of the widowed Duer, and Ricard right down the street.
Right down the street. Ricard had no business being in Manhattan, right? He's down there in the
he's a Tennessee boy.
Well, yeah, he's down there doing Cowboys and Indians, and now he's up in Manhattan.
And but he later in his later life there he resides in Tennessee, right?
Well, he owned land there, and I know that he was on Andrew Jackson's. I don't know if you want to say staff, but his posse, his crew, his inner circle. William Ricard was definitely in Andrew Jackson's inner circle. Absolutely.
And speaking of Jackson, we'll get into that'll be a future part here too. I think the ship manifest will probably be a whole part in of itself. A lot of this Jackson stuff with Ricard as well, because Jackson goes back to Charleston, doesn't he? In the Revolution, he got captured there by the British.
Well, and it's funny. Jackson went to law school or studied law in Rowan County, North Carolina, under a guy named McKay, who was a Princeton graduate. Throwing that out there.
But back to Rowan County, though, right?
Yeah, yes, sir. He studied law in Rowan County, and then after he finished, he was given the title of territorial judge in the Tennessee Territory. He was the highest-ranked government official in the territory at a very young age.
Sure. Something strange about Rowan County, though. That's for sure. We'll have to that'll be a future part in and of itself in this conversation. So
Maybe
I don't know that we didn't discuss Constant Freeman. Is that something we need to do a brief introduction in here too? Would that be part of the, kind of the John Lynn narrative, right?
Well, Constant Freeman, what's kind of interesting about him is he's in a lot of narratives that have seemingly nothing to do with each other. We have him in Quebec.
Very Ricard style man, huh?
Very much, very much. We have him in Quebec right after the Constitutional Convention, which apparently there was some grumblings in Canada about that. For some reason, they didn't maybe trust or like what the Americans were doing, because if I remember correctly, it was just something they kind of did. It was nothing that was voted on. They just all met in a room and decided, okay, this is our new government, and boom, that was it. But this was going on right around that time. He was up there with John Lind in Quebec, and Quebec is going to be a major city for the next installment. But the fact that he's there with John Lind at the same time, and knowing who John Lind is, and we'll kind of get into him more, but I don't think it was a coincidence, because Freeman just keeps showing up in weird places. He shows up in Georgia, and I have my theories on why he was in Georgia. But again, Quebec, now you're in Georgia, working for the government,
right?
Doing who knows what.
And a prominent member of the society, right? He was a colonel that served underneath General Knox. General Knox is technically the guy who is credited with creating the society, recommending it to George.
Yeah. So right off the bat, okay, that should tell us something. Him and Knox are tight, and he's a member of the Cincinnati. I have records of him paying his dues to the society, Massachusetts chapter, I believe it was. But you're in Quebec, then you're in Georgia, and I may have had him in Tennessee. I can't remember, but what he was doing in Georgia, I have my theories, and we'll talk about more. But Constant Freeman's a major player. Cato West is kind of his counterpart on the other side of the territory over in Natchez, and then of course John Lind. So John Lind, we'll start it off in Rowan County.
Yeah, that'll probably be our next part. Yeah, but I think it's important to point out the Freeman's connections. He had a Natchez situation, because we're pointing out this is what, 1790 or so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the Spanish, I believe, are occupying Natchez at this time.
But you have the French interest down there too in New Orleans.
Yeah, so you have the French down in New Orleans, you have the Spanish in Natchez, and I can't remember the exact dates, but I mean, both cities changed hands multiple times in a very short period of time.
Sure.
In fact, Britain, people forget, Britain occupied Natchez. They never occupied New Orleans, but they occupied Natchez.
Right. No, that is an important factor in all this mess. But yeah,
yes,
so Freeman's doing business in Quebec. He's doing business down near the French stuff in the other side of the country. You see what I'm saying? Like he's getting around pretty good, isn't he?
And and when you look at it through the lens of the time period, it does seem bizarre, doesn't it? I mean,
a lot of traveling. I mean, it wasn't easy to travel. Folks travel, but there's a lot of traveling. And I think it's important to note that Quebec appears later as the epicenter for French activity in the supporting the Confederate Army or the Confederate States. They were operating as their headquarters out of Quebec in support of the Confederate States of America.
Yeah, something's going on in Quebec, and when we're talking about John Lind next time, we'll definitely go into all that. But yeah, something's going on.
I thought stuff was going on in Quebec about 1820 or so, but you bringing it back another 30 years from that, going on in Quebec with these same activities, I suspect.
Probably yes. And we'll get into the Jesuits. We'll get into Masonic lodges, into houses of assembly, grand masters of lodges, land acquisition. I mean, and that's just Quebec. We haven't even got to New Orleans yet. I mean, we could talk for 2 hours just on Quebec.
No, yeah, this is gonna be a lengthy series. We'll definitely be linking up here for additional subsequent parts of this series for sure. because but I think you've done a great job of explaining your journey, Brad, and how you got here and how we met here, and the interesting the ins and outs and the interesting factors surrounding your genealogical journey and how it's tying into these elements of the Society of Cincinnati, and specifically revolving around George Washington and spook operations.
And I think that's basically the backdrop. When you look at it through that lens, because you really look at historical events differently when you look at it through this lens of basically a small group of people who already had consolidated power, consolidated it even further after the war, and basically just disenfranchised the enlisted guys who they would not have won the war without. And then the enlisted guys end up losing their farms, going to debtor's prison. I mean, so from day one, they're creating a divide. A big.
That's a good point. There was a lot of divide amongst the founding fathers too. Jefferson was back and forth on the matter. So was Franklin relative to the society, and they weren't. Jefferson, I guess, was a member as a result of being president. Possibly he served in an early militia there in Virginia as a captain, but it was before the war, so I don't think he qualified. But nonetheless, Franklin wasn't. But they both were on the fence at times, but later were backing the society. But folks like John Adams was always anti-society.
Somebody must have taught some sense into him, huh?
Well, again, I mean, there's a couple ways to look at it. Again, I go back to the moneyed interest. What was John Adams up to in life? Well, all of his business was over in England still. He was largely financed by, British interests at that point.
Oh, and speaking of banks, the McLeod ledger book, there's a lot of bankers in there from overseas. A lot of bankers.
Yeah. Very integral portion of operating a spy network.
Got to have funding.
Got to have them in separate places in which to distribute, right?
Yes, sir.
Logistically speaking. So no, these are great details. So if we can draw a close here and some closing statements you can offer us, so what do you think? You went looking for James Minyard and you found Joseph Miniere. What happened to these men?
Oh wow! So James Minyard resurfaces. So he kind of went off record for a while.
They both do, right?
Well, no, Joseph Miniere, no, he's pretty active there the whole time. But James Minyard disappears. He was on a tax list in Franklin County, Georgia. I don't think he was there, but he was on the tax list, and does not appear until over 10 years later in Lawrence County, Mississippi. 1813, I believe it was. And we'll talk about the Battle of New Orleans in 1815, because that's part of the story as well. But,
of course, with Jackson.
So James Minyard resurfaces in Lawrence County. And what I thought was weird, if you look at later census records of all his kids, all of his heirs, there are long gaps between, he fathered 9 children. There is a 6-year gap between 2 of the heirs and an 8-year gap between 2 other heirs. And these 2 gaps just happen to coincide with Joseph Miniere's activities, his heavy activity.
Yeah, I mean it's it's interesting, because again with Miniere having no other record, and it's nothing to say that he can't be operating under both pseudonyms simultaneously in various places. Especially when you're saying he's owning tax property, he owns property in one county. I wonder if some of that's from his pension from the war, the land deeds issued from the pension from the war.
If there is a pension, I've never seen it. I've never seen a pension application. I've never seen a veteran card. I've never seen a shred of single evidence that he served in any capacity whatsoever. But all his compatriots did. His best friend was actually 2 of his closest friends. One was a guy named Billy Smith, who we'll talk more about in the Battle of New Orleans, and then Owen Carpenter. Well, both of those men did serve, and I don't think
so. There's just the record of him being on the rolls of Ricard's muster roll. That's it, huh? There's no other. That's what I'm saying. As far as it's almost like a sheep dipping operation at that point, right? You're removing them from the main rolls, but you're using them in some corollary capacity.
And really, I had no business finding that record. The only reason I found it is it's a website called Papers of the War Department. They found basically it was kind of like the Cold War period, so to speak, between the Revolution and 1812. But to me, that's the most interesting part is that in between when all this chess is going on.
Yeah, like the time they burnt the White House. Yeah, that seems interesting,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, stuff like that. So I had no business finding this, but because these records were actually long since forgotten about, and they were found, and they did this project and they published it. So if I'd never found that, I would have never even known, or I would have never even made these connections and gone down these rabbit holes. It was just dumb luck that I found this document. And here we are. Here I am a couple years later talking to you.
No, I hear you. I mean, to that same note, if I didn't used to jog around in my neighborhood of DC when I was stationed there years ago, then we'll call it circa 2006 or 7. I'm top of my head, circa 2006. You know, I'm running around, jogging around my neighborhood, and I see the sign that says station there, you know, in the Air Force. And I see the sign that says Society of Cincinnati, and I'm like, wait a second, I'm from Cincinnati, so I mean, I got to check that out, right? So, you know, walked in one day.
Cincinnati,
yeah, walked in one day. I'm like, hey, I'm from Cincinnati. What do you guys do here? You know. So that was my initial introduction to the Society of Cincinnati.
Did you know about Abner Vance at this point?
You know, not really. I mean, kinda.
But not to the degree you do now.
Yeah, I mean, I knew of him in abstract, right? You know.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard stories growing up. You know, my grandmother Vance used to. When she was a big part of my childhood, helped raising me. She she would, you know, whenever she'd you know, punish me for good reasons. You know, I was a hellion as a small child. You know, she would she would you know, tell me I got too much Vance in me, stuff like that. But she would tell me I got the devil in me too. Like you know, she would reference, you know, she did reference Charles Manson, which is funny enough because she's cousins with Charles Manson through the Minyard family.
She probably the Maynards. We're not related to them.
Right,
I've looked at, we're not, but it
sounded
like your grandmother.
She was a Maynard. Since she's cousins with Charles Manson, she used to accuse me of being the devil like Charles Manson as a child, but also the devil like she used to accuse me of being the devil like my cousin Devil Zan's Hatfield.
Do you think your grandmother knew something?
She knows a lot. For a woman who never graduated high school from Pikeville, Kentucky, she was a brilliant lady.
Do you think she knew stuff on your backstory?
Oh, I've no doubt. Yeah, she's again brilliant lady. Not to be trifled with either. Not to be trifled with. Those you know, relative to the Hatfields and McCoy stories, you know, Devil Zan's is twice descended from Abner Vance through his mother and his father, grandson and great grandson. So he got a lot. He's got maybe too much Vance in him as well. You know what I mean? I got 4. He had 2. I'm just saying maybe that's the element. Maybe the element is you got too much Abner in you. You know, but
I want too much Miniere in me, man. I know what you mean.
The infamous war with the Hatfields and McCoys. You know, my grandfolks were kind of like a conjoining of those two feuding families. Not directly because Devil Zan's is a Vance. You know, I'm not a Hatfield, right? But and then my grandmother Vance she wasn't a McCoy, but her she's deeply related with the McCoys, with the Maynards there. So I got a lot of McCoy cousins. You know what I mean? And
I'd be curious to see if our DNA, if we share any DNA. I would be very curious.
I wouldn't be surprised. I really wouldn't. I mean, I would be surprised if we didn't. You know what I mean? But one of the infamous tales my grandmother Vance was a serious lady. You know what I mean? One of the infamous tales there through the her heritage there in the Pikeville, Kentucky. The McCoy, one of the famous McCoy families stories from the McCoy side of the Hatfield McCoy feuds. One of the McCoy boys apparently got shot and crawled back home and tried to crawl to his mother's house. Was bleeding on her front porch, so she came out and she just kicked him off the front porch and told him to die like a man out on the front yard. So
people didn't play back then.
No, that attitude I had very much in my childhood with my grandmother Vance. She's not to be trifled with, but yeah, she was a brilliant lady.
But you know what? I bet when if you were doing right, like you were supposed to do, she was probably the nicest lady in the world, wouldn't she?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Just don't piss her off.
Yeah, just a 5'1" lady of just superhuman strength. You know what I mean? Just some country strength. And she, of course, she raised a number of children herself and grandchildren way before me. I'm the end of all that madness. I got cousins that are 20 years older than me. You know what I mean? So
you got to be tough to do that, especially when you're doing it alone. Boy, I mean, you got to be a tough person.
Well, yeah, and her husband was a coal miner for years. You know, so
yeah,
different environment for sure. Definitely breeds a different tough, thick-skinned folks for sure. But I would not be surprised in it remotely. Again, Rowan, something weird is going on in Rowan County. We're going to be picking up some of the intersection of both yours and my heritage throughout there here in the next installment of the series. But I appreciate Brad of you joining me here. Not only joining me, but introducing me to all these new details of this journey that you're finding yourself on.
Hey, I feel the same way. Every time I talk to you, I learn something new. So it's
Nice.
always a pleasure. And hey, look, we don't have to do a podcast to talk, man. We can you can give me a call.
Right. Fair enough. I'll make sure we keep in contact more here going forward. But yeah, we'll definitely let's link up here in about a month. We'll do another. We'll keep in contact in between. But I'm saying as far as hammering out some more of these details of this narrative, because as we've painted we've done a great job. You've done a great job at outlining the characters involved. But I'm saying in outlining the characters, we've identified like 6 or 7 other parts. That's what I'm saying. It's a fairly expansive tale, but we'll definitely break it down into parts for sure going forward. But no, it's a unique tale, one that's lost to history, and I definitely appreciate you digging this one up for sure.
Hey, thanks for having me. My first ever podcast episode. I hope it didn't do too bad, but always a good conversation, JJ.
No, it's great conversation. I appreciate it, Brett, and like I said, we'll definitely be doing these again in the future.
Yes, sir. Looking forward to it.